Hey Nathan, I'm so grateful that we're able to do this booktube series. It's been so much fun. Yeah, I just I don't know how I would do this without your enormous presence.
I'm sorry, my what?
Your enormous presence. I don't mean your physical size, although I mean you do have. I mean, I don't mean. Well, I'm I'm not speaking very clearly, am I?
No, you're being really mean. I'm
Well,
working on it. Come on, buddy.
all I meant by that was that you have a vibrant personality and loud voice.
And a large physical body,
Well,
huh?
I mean, that's you fill up the frame pretty well. I mean, you don't fill the frame, but yeah,
This is a half frame. It's split screen, buddy.
I should just
Describing
stop
me,
talking.
you should. Describing me like I'm Captain Wittershins. This is humiliating. Listen, if I were being compared to sumo wrestlers, I would look real skinny. If I'm being compared to cyclists, I am Jabba the Hutt. So I'm somewhere in between.
All right, I think we can agree on
Yes, I'm
that.
somewhere in between there.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And if you're new to the series, we are reading through all of the books in a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, relieved by Daniel Handler. And we're doing 3 videos a week, 3 videos for each book, 1 video a week. And so we split up each book into chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13. For this week, we are specifically looking at The Grim Grotto, book the 11th, and chapters 5 to 8. And I should mention that this is my first time reading the series. You've read it before a couple times, including as a middle grade reader.
Yep, absolutely. Now, before we get into it, I believe we have a sponsor.
Yeah, we do. So, our sponsor for this week is Waxes and Wane's Mushroom Shop, preferred by mycologists everywhere, featuring white button mushrooms, oyster, shiitake, portobello, magic, what? And Medusoid Mycelium. You got to be really careful with that one. That one's pretty dangerous. But there is the new blend that they have. It's actually a mushroom tea. It is Metamucil Mycelium. And so, if you're having any issues with constipation, then relieve constipation with the savory taste of mushroom. Mmm,
Ooh,
mmm. Yeah,
wow. Yeah, that sounds great. For anybody who has that issue, I'm sure that's much appreciated.
exactly. Two of people's favorite things: the like mushroom tea and relieving constipation. It's
Absolutely.
flying off the shelves, I've been told.
Yeah. Yeah.
Un
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have a Waxes and Wane's mushroom shop in my town. It's really like this
Really?
backwater burg that I live in.
Wow. That's that is shocking. I mean, I don't think that we have one in the suburbs where I live, but I'm sure that they have one downtown.
Yeah, and I believe it's becoming more and more popular. I don't really
Yeah.
know how anybody can get through an ordinary week without visiting a dedicated shop specific to the sale of mushrooms.
Absolutely. I mean, any kind of mushroom, like just go there. It's your one-stop shop for all your mushroom needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So Waxes and Wayne's Mushroom Shop. Go there today. Go hang out where the mycologists hang out. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are looking at book the 11th, The Grim Grotto, and specifically at chapters 5 to 8. So I've got plot summary duty for this week. It's funny that it's called the Grim Grotto, but the actual grotto that they go to is the Gorgonian
Yeah.
Grotto.
Yeah,
So
I know. I feel like it was probably they didn't want to put a word like that on the cover, that it just would not be as appealing or too
yeah,
complicated.
yeah, I think that's probably fair. So anyway, I've got plot summary duty for the week. So basically, you've got the Baudelaires who are on the Queequeg submarine with Captain Wittershins and Fiona and Phil, and they've just arrived, or they're approaching the Gorgonian Grotto or the Grim Grotto,
Mhm.
and they are doing some research on this. So this is attached to the, what is it? The Anwhistle Aquatics
Yep.
something center. Is that what it
Yep.
is? Facility.
Yeah, some kind of facility,
And
research facility plus, um, oh, there was some other weird thing about vocabulary.
right.
Something. Yeah.
And Fiona does some research, and I guess she somehow has figured out that this Gorgonian grotto near it has got this particular type of mushroom, the Medusoid Mycelium mushroom, which is incredibly poisonous, and that
Yeah.
you'll die within the hour if you get any of the spores, like if you breathe in any of the spores or anything like that. And
I believe
they,
it's pronounced Medusoid,
okay,
similar
Medusoid.
to
Oh,
Medusa.
Medusa. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Medusoid mycelium. That makes sense. So they arrive at the grotto in the submarine, and then it's cone shaped, so they can't get to the end of it.
Hmm.
And so what they ultimately do is the Captain Wittershin says, "Hey, only a child can fit in there. A periscope is useless because they're pretty sure that that's where the sugar bowl has gone to based off of title charts." And they all end up getting into their suits. They go out, and through this explanation of the filling the chamber with water and getting the pressure to be equalized and all of that stuff, they then end up just following the current, go into the Grim Grotto, realize that there's actually a space where they can breathe, so they take
Hmm.
off their helmets, and then of course the whole place is filled with Medusoid mycelium mushrooms, and that's terrifying. And they wax and wane, so they come and go, and you get this explanation about how mushrooms function as an organism. And they search around for the sugar bowl, can't find it, and so then they're just like, well, so much for that idea, and how else are we supposed to get out of here? And the mushrooms start waning,
Hmm.
so ultimately they head back. Am I missing this? Is that not what happened, and why they decided to go back?
Yeah, no, I believe that's all. Yeah, they just can't find it. So, yep.
Yeah. So then they head back, and they get back to the submarine, except Captain Wittershins and Phil are not there. And as if that's not concerning enough, Sunny in her little helmet, because she's just in a diving helmet, then Fiona looks at it and says, oh no, it's the mushroom, the Medusoid mycelium mushroom, and we've only got an hour. She's already breathed it in. We can't open that up because that would infect everybody in the entire submarine. So I'll try to figure it out. But you guys go start the engines, saying that to Klaus and Violet. And jumping back to the previous chapter, then Violet found this scrap of newspaper. And she apparently learned something about Fiona that made her very suspicious about her.
Hmm.
And Fiona's definitely acting really strange by chapter 8.
Right. Yep.
Seemingly like, ooh, was she a villain, a villainess,
Yeah, there's definitely something going on there.
something?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that about does it. Yeah, lots of hanging threads there at the end of chapter 8.
Yeah.
Oh yes, and also there is the other submarine outside.
Oh, right.
That.
Yes, I apologize. There's also the other submarine that's hanging out just outside of theirs at the very end of chapter 8. And it's Olaf with his eye shaped submarine with the pipes and tubes and all of that spinning
Yeah.
around behind it. And, bum, bum, bum.
Hmm. All
All right.
right.
So why don't you get us started with chapter 5?
Sure. All right. So my first note is on page 93. Um, and you knew that I was going to bring this up, I'm sure. The end of this first paragraph, where Captain Wittershins says, "If you find me the sugar bowl, I'll allow you to marry Fiona." "Stepfather!" Fiona cried, blushing behind her triangular glasses. "Don't worry," the captain replied. "We'll find a husband for Violet, too." And just this whole idea of dear, um, of Captain Witterson's just being like, "Hey, you definitely you're gonna get married," and it's kind of this whole joke about parents, setting up their children and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really have much to say with it. It's done in a fairly inoffensive way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, all right, moving on to page 97. Um, this description of uncharted waters, I think that it's really well done. And I mean, it takes up, just over a full page. But the way that uh, I'll just start at the top of the page. The Baudelaires looked at one another. The phrase uncharted waters does not only refer to underground locations that do not appear on charts, it is a phrase that can describe any place that is unknown, such as a forest in which every explorer has been lost, or one's own future, which cannot be known until it arrives. You don't know, you don't have to be an optimist like Phil to find uncharted waters fun. I myself have spent many an enjoyable afternoon exploring the uncharted waters of a book I have not read, or a hiding place I discovered in a sideboard, a word which here means a piece of furniture in the dining room with shelves and drawers to hold various useful items. So there's a few things that are going on here. The one is he's setting up, uh, the fact that there is a sideboard in the submarine, and this is kind of his way of describing it now so that it doesn't bog down the pace
Mm,
later on.
mm. Yeah.
Um, uh, is that kind of a reference to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? With him like discovering something within this piece of furniture.
Hmm.
Yes, and so the other thing is, I love the fact that he says you don't have to be an optimist like Phil to find uncharted waters fun. It's a surprising turn for Snicket, who is always like, oh, like don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. That he's like, hey, this can actually be fun in the right circumstances.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
agree. Yeah. And normally because he's so rarely sincere,
Hmm.
then he's often being absurd, where it, he's taking things to the extreme. He's saying, if you are this type of person over on this side, you'll enjoy it. And if you're the other type of person, then you'll hate this activity. And he very much oversimplifies people and
Yeah.
humanity. And in this case, then he's saying, hey, you don't have to be this type of person or that type of person to enjoy it. It can just be fun. And yeah, because he's often going for this joke where
Yeah.
if you oversimplify things and personality types, then you can create some silliness out of that. But in this moment, that he seems to be sincere.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Um, all right. Hopping over to page 100. This is Captain Wittershins here says, nobody would write a message to Jacques. Captain Wittershins said, I, Jacques is dead. Et heart sigum, Sunny said, and her siblings quickly explained that she meant the initials were JS. It must be some other JS, Fiona said. Now, I spent some time looking at that because it seems so odd coming from Sunny that this, is just complete nonsense. And it is actually magistrate spelled
Yeah.
backwards. And then I realized that the reason for that is because JS, we've only seen, I think, one other character in the series who has the initials JS, which is Justice Strauss.
Oh, a magistrate of the court.
Yes. Yeah. So that takes some work to figure out.
That's a
Um,
really good point, though, because I recognized it as magistrate, but I had no idea why she said magistrate, and
yeah.
then which meant JS. But you're right, Justice Strauss, magistrate. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Um,
That,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure. So just yeah, really interesting there. Um, and hopping over to 101, this is where we get, oh my goodness, so many references. Um, this is reading all the different chapters in this book, Mushroom Minutia. Um, so, chapter 36, The Yeast of Beasts. Chapter 37, Moral Behavior in a Free Society. Moral is a type of mushroom, so that's just a really fun
Mm.
uh, play on things there. Play on moral being, a sense of morals. Um, and chapter 38, Fungible Mold, or Fungible. I think it's fungible.
Fungible,
Um,
yeah.
and fungible is able to replace or be replaced by another identical item.
Mm.
Um, so that does work as well. Chapter 39, Visitable Fungal Ditches, that's VFD, and then the Gorgonian Grotto. So yeah, just a series of references there.
But what are they references to?
Or maybe not references, but they're wordplay at the very least.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
I agree that they're definitely wordplay, and they
Yeah.
might be references to specific things like moral behavior in a free society. Like
Hmm.
maybe, perhaps that is. I don't know. Um, but yeah, he's definitely having fun with wordplay. I found in this book he's having more fun with wordplay than he's had in a while.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, even just the Gorgonian grotto being a reference to, the Gorgons of Greek myths,
Exactly.
which is fantastic. I love Greek mythology, so. um, all right, hopping over to page 108. Let me see. Oh, yes, this is even more references and all that. Yeah, so starting at the bottom of 107, you think the Herman Melville suits are the only noble uniforms in the world? There used to be volunteers with P.G. Wodehouse on their uniforms and Carl Van Vechten. There was Commons and Cleary and Archie and Mehitabel, but now volunteers are scarce. So, my goodness, there are so many people being referenced here.
Yeah.
Most of them, like P.G. Wodehouse, is a English author. Um, Carl Van Vechten is also a writer. I'm pretty sure pretty much all of them are. Commons seems to be a reference to Barbara Collins, or sorry, Barbara Commons, and who is also a writer. Mehitabel
And
is
Cleary, I'm assuming is Beverly Cleary.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Mehetabel, it's a little unclear because it could be a reference to Mehetabel Wesley Wright, who was an English poet. But then there's also the reference to like Archie and Mehetabel. Then
Yeah.
Archie and Mehetabel are two fictional characters from a created by Don Marquis. Um, so, yeah, so I'm not.
Yeah, and those are because I did look that one up. That apparently, like this was like a cartoon series, a comic strip,
Mhm.
that appeared in newspapers. Archie's a cockroach, and Mehitabel is an alley cat.
Yeah, yeah. So Mehitabel, then I'm not quite sure if it's, I'm assuming that it's just the reference to the comic strip because it is Archie and Mehitabel. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
but he does the same thing with Comans and Cleary, but they don't seem to be connected.
hmm.
So I don't know.
Absolutely.
Uh, have you thought any at all about the significance of why he names those particular authors?
I haven't really.
Yeah, me
Because I
neither.
mean, like I kind of looked at it, but there's so many there that it's hard to
Yeah,
find, any kind of connection between them because you're just like, I'd have to really think about it.
I agree. No, that's the thing is I'm not saying that these are just random references because sometimes we go through it and even really puzzling through it, it still seems like they're just random references. I don't know in this case because he's just name dropping so much
Yeah.
that I'm just like, okay, there could be some connection, but I don't have enough context or background knowledge on any of these people to be
Mhm.
able to make any kind of connection. And I'm not really willing to spend, an hour or several hours
Yeah.
researching and researching just to go, I get it. So if
Right.
somebody knows, if somebody has done a little bit of research on that or has got good background knowledge, then please let us know.
Absolutely. All right, and those were my notes for chapter 5.
Okay, well, you covered then the two sections that I had marked for chapter 5. So,
Okay, cool.
all right,
Do you want to get started with chapter 6?
sure. On page 125, I'm sure that you notice this and you probably have this marked as well, but basically page 125 all the way over to 134,
Mhm.
then this is another example of TV logic.
Mm.
We've talked about this before, where the story keeps going even if you're asleep, just like on television. That
Right.
the idea being, Snicket is saying, well, these are awful things that happen. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you very, very boring facts about the water cycle, and I'm just going to repeat myself until you fall asleep. And then I can get on with the frightening part of the story, and then you'll wake up later on. As though reading a book is just like watching television, that
Yeah.
you can't, especially, 20 years ago, although I guess he wasn't writing 20 years ago, like 16 years ago or whatever it was when he published this. But I believe in 2004, then we had some of the I forget what the first device was for doing it, but where you could pause live TV.
Right. Yeah.
I
Like
forget what.
TiVo or
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was TiVo that
Yeah.
you were able to do that. But like most people did not have that. So it's just
Right.
one of those things that if there's a show on TV, you can't pause it, you can't rewind it, you can't skip forward. It's
Hmm.
just that show is on from 8 p.m. until 8:30. So if you fall asleep, or like let's say from 8 to 9, if you fall asleep from 8:15 to 8:45 and then you wake back up, then you're just going to have missed part of it. So
Yeah.
he's doing the same thing here. We've seen him do this before,
Hmm.
because, like I say, on page 125, then he really starts going over that. Um, it's a long section going over the water cycle,
Yeah.
and towards the bottom of that paragraph on 125, then he says, otherwise known as the water cycle, and surely you must be asleep by now, and so can be spared the horrifying details of the Baudelaire's journey. And then he actually gives the details of the Baudelaire's journey. And then if you skip over to 134, then I guess we've woken up from our nap at this point, where he then says that like this is, I guess, the middle of that paragraph. The Baudelaires and their mycologist friend thought that looking for the sugar bowl was half the battle, but I'm sorry to tell you that they were wrong, and it is lucky that you fell asleep earlier during my description of the water cycle, so you will not learn about the other half of the Baudelaire's battle and the ghastly poison they would end up battling not long after their search through the sand. So essentially saying from 125 to 134, you've fallen asleep, and so
Right.
you missed all of that stuff, as though a book just keeps going without your act of reading.
Right.
Just like on television, and I've pointed it out before, so I am repeating myself, but this is from quite a while ago, the last time that this came up, so I think it bears repeating, that he seems to be speaking to kids who have grown up watching television but have not read a lot. So he's
Hmm.
saying, you're familiar with how television works. So I'm just going to apply that same principle to books, to make books, to familiarize yourself with books, to try to make you more comfortable with them, even though that's not how they function at all.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I was thinking about like other ways that you can experience these books. Of course, they, have become a Netflix series where you could fall asleep while watching it.
Sure.
But even before that, you could have, say, a parent reading this to you, and so
That's true.
you could literally fall asleep while they are reading something boring like that, um, or uh, or an audio version of the book.
That is true. That is true. That depending on how the story is being told, then it can function that way. You are right. I guess I'm saying the traditional way of reading a
Yeah,
book would mean that, of course, if you fall asleep, when you wake up, you just continue reading from where it was that you left off at before you fell asleep.
yeah,
But you are right that depending on how the story is being presented, then it could work. And it's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be a funny thing for kids who are reading this, where they
right,
go, oh, other people might miss this part, but I didn't fall asleep, not even through the
right.
boring part. So now I get to read the horrifying part.
Yeah.
Like, pat on the back. I'm such a good reader, and other people are going to miss this.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
all right.
Um,
127. This
mhm.
is the description of the Gorgonian grotto and the whatever it's called, the Anwhistle Aquatics
Mhm.
facility. And so going from the bottom, I guess, of 126 over to 127, it says they might have noticed the mosaic on the grotto floor, thousands and thousands of colorful tiles depicting noble events from the early history of a secret organization, and portraits of famous writers, scientists, artists, musicians, philosophers, and chefs who had inspired the organization's members. They might have seen an enormous rusted pumping machine, which was able to drain the entire grotto or flood it with seawater again in mere minutes. They might have gazed upward and seen the sharp angles of various vertical flame diversions and other secret passageways that once led all the way up to the Marine Research Center and Rhetorical Advice Service. And then it continues on now. And then you do have the, I guess I should mention that, or even spotted the person who is using one of the passageways now, and probably for the last time, as she made her difficult and dark way toward the Queequeg. So we don't know who that is.
Right.
That is a significant thing that comes up. The only thing that I was trying to point out with that, though, it's very much reminiscent of a description of Atlantis.
Right.
So it's the
Yes.
lost city of Atlantis. It is this ancient civilization that is somehow far more advanced than the rest of the ancient world, and even by today's standards could have some technology that we just cannot even conceive of. They were so advanced, but then it's lost to the ocean, or really to the Mediterranean. Is, I think, where most people think Atlantis is. Maybe not. I know some people will say it's in the Atlantic, but as
Yeah.
best way to, it seems to be like off of Greece in the
Right.
Mediterranean is where people started. Anyway, it doesn't matter because it's a
Yeah.
mythical place.
Yeah.
So, and it's unknown where it could possibly have been, but
Yeah.
it seems very much like a description of Atlantis.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had the same section marked just as, this whole description of how fantastical this place would be, but I hadn't made the connection uh, to Atlantis. And this is right in the midst of you know, a like a full description of events. It's a good change of pace from most of the rest of the series, where it is all dialogue and all that, or just clever wordplay. And this is literally just, you know, a description of events that happen,
Yeah.
and it works surprisingly well.
It does work surprisingly well. I would say, I mean, I'm not finished the book, but this is maybe the strongest book so far in the series.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I would agree.
yeah, it's kind of everything is working because sometimes he's successful in what he's attempting to do, and sometimes he's not. But with this, almost everything he does in this book, he's, I think, pretty successful in achieving. And
Absolutely.
and yeah, and this whole mention of Atlantis, like I say, it's just because it's underneath the sea. Nobody else knows how to get there, and especially the mosaics with the tiles and all of these
Yeah.
people and all this knowledge that's lost to the rest of the world, and the secret knowledge and this secret place and all of this, that it very much feels like they're journeying to Atlantis here.
hmm It,
That's all that I had for chapter 6.
that's also all I had for chapter 6.
All right, look at us go.
Yeah.
I guess you can go first with chapter 7.
Sure. All right. So my first note here is on page 148. Um, this is another moment of real sincerity and a great description of, the way that grief works and after a loved one has passed. Just toward the middle of the page. To the Baudelaires, it felt almost as if they had drawn a line after their parents died, a secret line in their memories, separating all the wonderful things about the Baudelaire parents from the things that perhaps were not quite so wonderful. Since the fire, whenever they thought of their parents, the Baudelaires never stepped over this secret line, preferring to ponder the best moments the family had together rather than any of the times when they had fought or been unfair or selfish. But now, suddenly, in the gloom of the Gorgonian grotto, the siblings stumbled across that line and found themselves thinking of that angry afternoon in the library, and in moments other angry afternoons and evenings had occurred to them until their brains were lousy with memories of all stripes, a phrase which here means both good and bad. Um, yeah, and I mean it's so true of, after someone you care about passes away, then, you want to only think about the good things, the good times that you had with them, and that can last for a while. But there does come a point where, you start remembering other moments
Mm.
that maybe weren't as nice, and so it's an interesting moment of growth. Moving beyond just the sadness to just have like clearer sight of who they were.
I guess, but I don't think that I actually don't like this passage because I don't think that they're growing in this. They're not maturing. They are unhappy that they have that memory of
Mm, yeah.
their parents being imperfect. It says on page 149, it gave the siblings a queasy feeling to cross this line in their memories and admit that their parents were sometimes difficult, and it made them feel all the queasier to realize they could not step back and pretend they had never remembered these less than perfect moments any more than they could step back in time and once again find themselves safe in the Baudelaire home before Fire and Count Olaf had appeared in their lives. They're upset with themselves. They literally are sick because they remember the fact that their parents were not perfect. And
Right.
I don't think that that's healthy because they're not growing. They're actually, so I'm not saying that they can't grow through this, that they can't mature through this, but I don't think they're far along in the grieving process as you're suggesting.
Mm,
Um, and I think that there's a lot of people who do that with a loved one who passes away. And I think you explained it really well that for quite a while, people only want to remember the good. And then over time, they start to allow the full picture to emerge and to be like, right, they weren't perfect and they did have that. And I was angry with them there. And that was a big point of contention, but it's okay now, right?
hmm.
That like,
Yeah.
and you can kind of accept them for everything that they are. But for somebody to idealize a person, like you don't want to be idealized in somebody's
Right.
eyes. You really don't, because you are not an ideal person. You have flaws. And for somebody to love you only because they only see your admirable traits, your virtuous traits, but they are just blind to your
Mm,
shortcomings. And it's like, but you should, like, to me, a full and perfect love means that you're not happy with somebody's less than admirable traits,
right.
but you recognize them, right? And you love
Yes.
them even in their weaknesses and failings. And in this, it's like they can't accept the fact that their parents had weaknesses and failings and love
Mm,
them, uh, not even so much despite that, but just love them knowing that and accepting that.
right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. I guess it is just, the fact that they have stepped over that line is you
It
know,
seems against their will, though.
that's
It's
true.
because of Fiona talking about Captain Wittershins and his temper and her stepbrother and whatever else, and that jogs their memory of their parents being upset. Unless I'm
Hmm.
misremembering it, but is that not how that gets triggered with them?
Yeah, no, I believe that is.
Yeah, Fiona says like about her mother, like, did your mother always joke around like that? Mine used to get awfully mad if I didn't clean my room. And then Klaus says our mother would get mad too. Um,
Mhm. Yeah. Um, all right. Well, moving on to page 151. Um, and the there's this description of a bunch of different objects that they find buried in the sand. Um, and the one that really stood out to me is when Violet finds an odd square stone with messages carved in three languages. And it seems to be a reference to the Rosetta Stone.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I didn't
And
look it up, but I assumed that's what it was supposed to be referencing.
yeah, I assume that that's what it is. And not necessarily being the Stone, but a Rosetta Stone
Right,
of this organization, let's
right.
say. Um, Yep. And then let's see, my next note is on page 157. Um, this is this I feel it's not exactly lampshading, but it almost makes you second guess. Any typos or anything that you've found in any of the previous books or even this book, um, where Snicket is describing um, the different kinds of codes that can be used, or really Klaus is describing it. It's a bit tricky, Klaus said, opening his commonplace book in which he'd copied the information. The book uses a poem called My Last Duchess by Robert Browning as an example. Uh, yeah, right, Klaus said. But if a volunteer uses the name of the poem in a coded communication, the title might be My Last Wife instead of My Last Duchess, by the poet Albert Browning instead of Robert Browning. What purpose would that serve? Violet said. The volunteer reading it would notice the mistake, Klaus said. The changing of certain words or letters is a kind of fluctuation. If you fix the fluctuations in the poem, you'd receive the message. Duchess R, Fiona asked, what kind of message is that? Um, and so, we had talked, I believe it was at the beginning of uh, book the 10th, when, Snicket changed the name. He made that error of calling it the road less traveled as opposed to the road
Yes.
not traveled. That's the
Yes.
thing you can kind of go, oh, well, was there a purpose there? Am I supposed to go back through and see if, you
Right.
know, there's any sort of secret message hidden there? And I don't think that there is, but it is just kind of an interesting, again, not quite lampshading, but certainly something to make you second guess all the errors that you found.
Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps that is what's going on. I wonder if anybody has ever tracked that.
Right.
Where they've tried to actually look at all of the errors where you say it should say this word, but it says this one. It should say this, but it says this. And if somebody tracked it from all of the books to see if there's some kind of secret message in there,
Hmm. Yeah. No,
I'm
absolutely.
unwilling to do it, but
Right.
I'd be curious if somebody has done the work and what it says.
Agreed. Um, all right. So hopping over to page 161, and this is my last note for the chapter. Uh, and um, this is the letter from Kit Snicket, which is quite an interesting first name, if you ask me. Um, but yeah, this discussion of the poisonous fungus you insist on cultivating in the grotto will bring grim consequences for all of us. Our factory at Lousy Lane can provide some dilution of the mycelium's destructive respiratory capabilities, and you assure me that the mycelium grows best in small enclosed spaces, but this is of little comfort. Um, so the the reference to Lousy Lane, which was featured in the reptile room, is interesting. Um, do you happen to remember what the factory was? Because there was a factory along that road, um, along Lousy Lane, like it was described in the reptile room.
Was that the Um, well, I know that it smelled like horseradish along the way. Was that what the factory was for?
Yeah, I think so. So it's interesting to think that, oh, maybe maybe VFD actually owned that factory.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because it says our factory.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, interesting.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
All right, and that is all that I had for chapter 7.
Okay. Um, if you go back to the beginning of it on page 139, the very beginning of chapter 7, then he goes over this long, several pages, 3 pages of wordplay with the word lousy,
Hmm.
where he says, and I'll just start from the beginning there, the word lousy, like the word volunteer, the word fire, and the word department, and many other words found in dictionaries and other important documents, has a number of different definitions depending on the exact circumstances in which it is used. And it, I just and then he's riffing off of lousy and all the different meanings that you can get from it. I just thought that it's surprising that it takes Snicket this long before he does this kind of extended wordplay, and before he mentions that, where he's like, words can have different definitions depending on the context. He says depending on the circumstances, which is not the best way of describing it, but
Yeah.
you know, and it is like there's parts of the book, like as middle grade books, I appreciate what he's doing, but as an English professor, I get frustrated at times. Like when he describes the way Klaus, who's such a great researcher, or Isadora, who's a poet, the way she can immediately understand the meaning of any poem. And Klaus can immediately understand the meaning of any text, whatever it happens to be, fiction, nonfiction, technical, artistic. It doesn't matter. He can understand any text. If it's in writing, he understands it perfectly. He struggles a little bit more with poetry because they have to, like, Snicket has to allow Isadora to be perfect in poetry. And my frustration is that this is not correct in terms of approaching literature as though there is one meaning with literature. And this is precisely why there is not one meaning, like one correct interpretation of a complex piece of literature like a novel. It's because every individual word can be interpreted in different ways, and that different readers are going to pull different meanings from a text. And the idea that there is the one correct meaning that Klaus will find and Isadora will find is nonsense. That you can read a poem and understand exactly what the poet means, and it's like, well, no, but poetry is written in such a way that it lends itself to many interpretive possibilities. And that's part of the beauty of it, is that you can read a poem or read a complex text and get something different out of it each time you read it, depending on where you're at in life, what's going on in your life, personal circumstances, your age, where you live, what you've read before, what you're thinking about at the time, that you can just find new stuff when you go to a well-written text again and again and again. And I wish that he would acknowledge that a little bit more. And he kind of does in this passage, saying words can have different meanings.
Right.
And anyway, so that, but like the shorthand of what I'm saying here is him playing with how lousy can mean different things. And then he just plays with the word for 2.5 pages here is, I'm looking at that going, I'm surprised it took him that long before being that explicit.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that some kids were reading it carefully, trying to understand exactly, oh, he means lousy in this way here, and in this way here, and in this way here. And isn't this funny how you can use it 3 times in a row and it still makes sense? And yeah. And if it's your first time really encountering that, then I suppose it's fun. All right. On page 147, then at the top of the page, it says, Fiona grinned. What was your least favorite song? She asked, because like Violet was saying that her mother would give her this Hobson's choice, and I did look it up because I'm not really familiar with the term Hobson's choice, but the way Snicket describes it on page 146 is exactly right as far as I can tell. Were you familiar with that term?
No. I almost looked it up, and then I'm like, oh, he gives a pretty substantial definition of it.
He gives a definition, but then I was suspicious because he often misdefines things.
Right.
He incorrectly will define them or give a false history or a skewed history, but in this case it seems to be accurate. So anyway, that's the Hobson's choice, which essentially boils down to take it or leave it.
Gotcha.
You can have it or you can have nothing.
Right.
There's other versions of this, of, you know, your choices are only bad options, and et cetera, et cetera. But then, so saying like, yeah, my mom would sing a song that I hated if I didn't clean my room. And then Fiona grins. What was your least favorite song? She asked. Row, row, row your boat, Violet said. I hate the part about life being but a dream. And then I'm wondering, is Violet worried that she's fictional?
That's really interesting.
Life is but a dream. Violet, you're but a dream. You're just imagination. You don't really exist. And it's, stop it, Mom.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because then also the mention of Edgar Guest immediately following that,
Yeah.
um, then he apparently his poems often had an inspirational or optimistic view of everyday life. And so it's really interesting that both of them, are opposed to this optimistic viewpoint on life.
Oh, I guess I see what you're saying. That she hates the part because like life is but a dream. Like it's just like a dream. Like it's a beautiful thing. Like,
Right. Yeah.
boy, that's the dream. Live in the dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way it's supposed to be interpreted
Mhm.
because then immediately have that reference to Edgar Guest, who does these optimistic poems, and it's like, oh, that's cheerful and uplifting. I hate it. Oh,
Right.
that's cheerful and uplifting. I hate it. But I really do wonder if there's something about this idea of she is worried about being fictional, that it's this
Hmm.
metafictional moment of
Yeah.
going, don't tell me that life is but a dream, because yeah,
Right.
or
Yeah,
just a
that's really
fear of
interesting.
surrealism, perhaps,
Hmm.
right? That experience of just everything feels dreamlike. That some
Yeah.
people are uncomfortable with that. Um, all right, and then we talked about the whole thing with grieving, and then on page 158, this is my last note for chapter 7, and I don't have any notes for chapter 8. So in the middle of that page, starting with the paragraph that says, do you think the missing page is a code too? Violet asked. Klaus shrugged. I don't know, he said. Codes are nothing more than a way of talking so that some people understand and other people don't. Remember when we talked to Quigley in the cave with all the other Snow Scouts listening? Yes, Violet said, we used words that began with V, F, and D so that we knew we were all on the same side. And like, yes, that is a way of understanding codes, but I just put down that reading, and we've talked about it before, but writing and reading are that's encoding and decoding.
Right. Yeah.
That we encode and decode even when we're unfamiliar, like even when we're not conscious of it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
language itself is a kind of encoding and decoding.
Hmm.
When I say, I'm going to, like, we need to read a book, I say the word book, that just has a sound. That all of that is just vibrations in the air.
Right.
Book, the sound that I just made, is not the thing itself, right?
Right.
This is the thing itself, but I have to come up with some kind of coded way of using sound waves to be able to express an idea through sound that then
Mm.
represents this physical object. But book is not book, because book is just sound
Yeah.
waves that we've just commonly accepted as meaning. It's a reference to this physical object. And so they're not getting into it at all, but I just feel like, yeah, but everything's kind of encoded.
Right.
That you are talking about, like, ooh, language can be used as a code. I'm going, language itself is a code.
Right. Yes.
Right? Because
Yeah.
certainly if somebody's speaking, if you have a couple people speaking a different language, uh, and you don't speak the language, then they're not speaking in code. They're just speaking normally in their language. They're not trying to hide anything, but you can't decode the language because you don't know it. Like if you're, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
on a bus and, a couple people are speaking Russian, you're going to be like, I have no idea. They could be talking about me. They could be talking about anything. I can't decode it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
he makes this distinction of, oh, language can be used this way. And I'm just like, I guess, like, but that's just sort of a code within a code.
Right.
It's just a
Yeah.
more complex code. That's all that codes are. It's how complex they are, how easy it is to decode them or not.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. One of my favorite encoding systems is Pig Latin, um, which was actually invented by Canadians during one of the World Wars. Um,
Why? Why did they invent it?
because they didn't want the enemy to be able to easily understand what they were saying. So if
Oh,
they
okay.
understood English, then they wouldn't understand Pig Latin,
Right.
because it's all this, back and forth sort of speaking. But one of the reasons why it's my absolute favorite is because I feel like that is a large part of why Americans, as well as other parts of the world, think that we say A so much. Because speaking Pig Latin involves you putting A at the end of literally every word.
Right. That's funny. That
So,
is
of
funny.
course, it would be Canadians who invented
Right.
it.
Right.
Um,
Uh, but yeah, I did not know that that was invented by Canadians. That's an interesting backstory to it.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Once I found that out, I was like, I immediately appreciate Pig Latin even more. Yes. All right. Well, I only have one note for chapter 8, um, and that is on page 178. Um, this is we get this, interesting comment about a short woman might be difficult to see on a crowded city street, particularly if she has disguised herself as a mailbox and people keep putting letters in her mouth. It's such a funny gag.
I agree. He didn't have me with mailbox. I was like, okay. But then the tag on the joke, and people keep putting
Yeah,
letters in her mouth. I go, now that's funny. Because the first
yeah,
part, I'm like, yeah, okay, got it. Because he's got that little turn. Oh, she's short. You wouldn't be able to see her. Right. And she's dressed as a mailbox, huh? And you're like, yeah, I expected there to be a turn. And people keep putting letters in the mouth. I'm going, all right, the tag now got me.
Yep, absolutely. And a small ceramic bowl with a tight-fitting lid to keep something important inside might be difficult to find in the laundry room of an enormous hotel, particularly if there were a terrible villain nearby, making you feel nervous and distracted. So the small ceramic bowl with a tight-fitting lid is a reference to the sugar bowl.
Are you sure? Yeah, no,
Um,
I know. Like a lot of kids might not recognize that. It does. It is instructional. It's
yes.
teaching them read carefully,
Yeah.
consider every word. What else? Like, how would you describe a sugar bowl? Like most sugar bowls would be a small ceramic bowl, and we know that there's something inside the sugar bowl. It's very important, so it would have to have a tight lid and all of
Mhm.
that stuff. That if you're a careful reader, you'll have more fun with these books than if you're a careless reader.
Absolutely. And then yeah, the laundry room of an enormous hotel, and we do know that they are heading toward Hotel Denouement.
Right.
So yeah. Um yeah, so that was my last note.
Yeah, I don't have any other specific notes. It's interesting whatever's going on here with Fiona and Violet,
Mm,
because Violet's been suspicious, um, like even before this, even before she finds that newspaper clipping, whatever it is about Fiona, but even asking about Fiona's brother, she seems fairly interested in Fiona's stepbrother.
right. Yeah.
And at first, like when I read that, I was like, what is going on? Like, I'm like, listen, you've already got like two Quagmires interested in you. Do you really need another boy interested in you? Because like Widdershins is talking about marrying her off, right? Like,
Right.
and so anyway, then I'm going, is that what's going on here? Then and then as she's already not feeling great about Fiona, and then finds the newspaper clipping, and then doesn't want to bring it up at the time, and
Mm,
then is going along with things. So I'm going, I don't know what's going on here. Why she's so suspicious over Fiona? Like what's tipping her off before she gets to this newspaper clipping?
mm.
But it's not just the newspaper clipping. It seems that she's suspicious of her before this.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really picked up on that. But
It's a
yeah.
really weird moment when she's asking about the brother. I
Mm.
think it was where it's talking about um, the different songs, like like the row 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 your boat thing.
Oh, right.
Then
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that it was there that she starts asking about the brother, but it might have even been before that.
Yeah, because I think that was after she read the newspaper clipping, but she just didn't tell them what it said.
Oh yeah, you could be right. But I might be thinking it might have occurred even before that that she was asking about the brother. But in any case, whatever's going on with Violet and Fiona is interesting because
Hmm.
Violet is keeping it to herself, and it
Right.
seems that like we haven't really seen that before. Normally, there would be this knowing look between her and Klaus and Sunny if somebody's
Hmm.
not quite right. But it almost seems, and I mean, I'll keep reading because I don't know that it's going to go in this direction, but at this point, it almost seems as though there's a little bit of discomfort with a female rival who's her age and is very talented. We didn't get that with Isadora. But
Right.
then again, Isadora was a couple years younger than her. But this is a
Yeah.
girl who's slightly older than Violet. So they don't seem like they're best friends. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Before this, then they got along really well with the Quagmires.
Right.
We
Yeah.
haven't really seen them interact with their peers very much, with people who are close to their age. But in this case, um, there just seems to be some tension.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that is fair. And yeah, we will have to see if that goes anywhere.
Right,
Uh,
because I wonder how much of it is, you know, if this is what Snicket or really what Handler is doing at all. But certainly, I mean, I've taught high school long enough that I've had female students who are very explicit about the fact that it is hard to trust teenage girls, like the way girls treat girls, teenage girls will treat teenage girls, and that there often is a lot of suspicion over, what did she mean by that? Like boys, it's a lot more on the surface.
right.
It's, how do you know that he doesn't like you? He said, I don't like you. How do you know that he thinks you're ugly? He told me you're ugly. But girls, it's like, oh, that's a really interesting top you're wearing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Stuff
Yeah.
like that, where it's all like, what does that mean? And it's subtle, and then they like pick it apart. But boys tend to be a little bit more direct,
Hmm.
and that seems to be something. I just wonder if he's putting that in the book because girls who are reading these books, and as they're getting into their early teen years, as the books are getting longer, then I think a lot of readers are aging up with the series, that girls might start to experience this, where it's like, ooh, I don't know if I can necessarily trust like my best friend anymore, or trust other girls in my class, and getting a little bit suspicious over girls as being rivals in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I'm going to try to be more aware of that as we keep reading.
Yeah, I just think especially because she doesn't mention it to Klaus.
Right. Yeah.
That's where I'm going. This seems strange because we haven't seen this before. It's strange because we haven't seen her interact with peers
Right.
aside from like Quigley and Duncan and Isadora. Then
Hmm.
we really haven't seen them interact with kids their age. And so this is only the second girl that we've seen Violet interact with, and this girl is the first one that we've seen who's close to her age but a little bit older, and she is not responding really well to her. It's not overt, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? But it's not like she's acting as though um, Fiona is this awful villainess like Esme, that
Right.
we can't be around her at all. Instead, it's more just, I don't know that I like her.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's different. So I'm just curious if that is factoring into this of the experience that many teenage girls have. I'm not saying all teenage girls. I want to be very clear on that. But like I say, like, you know what I mean? When you teach hundreds into the thousands of teenagers over the years, then you get to have a sense of stuff that, like trends and things that tend to be commonly problematic at that age.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's all that I've got with that part. But we'll move on to the last third of the book, chapters 9 to 13. We'll be talking about that next week.
Yeah. Although it is a bit more than a third of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we are always tacking on an extra chapter, but the structure is different with like this one and the last book, where the last 5 chapters are a lot longer
Yeah.
than the previous chapters. But
Yeah.
anyway, but we're getting there, so that's what we're going to focus on for next week.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.